All right, so uh, are you ready to get back into the swing of things with another deep dive?
Always. What are we diving into this time?
Well, this time we are heading into Gotham City.
Ooh, Gotham. Sounds exciting, but we've done so many deep dives already on Batman and the extended universe. What more is there to uncover?
You're right, we have gone pretty deep into a lot of different Batman media, but this time I think you'll find this particularly interesting. We're taking a look at the new HBO Max series, The Penguin.
Okay, I'm intrigued. The Penguin was a fantastic character in the Batman, but a whole show about him, where did they even go with that?
Well, that's the beauty of it, right?
Hmm.
We get to see a different side of him. But that's not even the best part. We're not just talking about the show itself. We've got this really insightful review from, well, I guess you could call him a Spanish film critic on YouTube. And he really digs into some of the aspects of the show that, honestly, I hadn't even considered.
Oh, I love that. I always find it fascinating to get these different cultural perspectives on things. It's like you're seeing the same thing, but through a completely different lens, which I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes makes you rethink your whole take on it. So, what does our Spanish friend have to say about the penguin then? Is it any good?
That's the thing. He doesn't really give it a straight good or bad rating. He seems to be really fascinated by the show, but also kind of frustrated at the same time.
Uh oh. That sounds complicated. What's he frustrated about?
Well, he dives into this whole thing about how the penguin is a prime example of what he sees as a bigger problem in a lot of modern TV shows, especially those spin-offs and prequels.
Okay, yeah, I can see where he's coming from there. We do see a lot of those, don't we? And not all of them are, shall we say, successful.
Exactly. And this is where his perspective gets really interesting. He talks about this trend of studios wanting to cash in on already popular franchises is like this cycle, this kind of safe bet financially. But he argues it can sometimes be creatively stifling, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I get it from a business standpoint. Why take a risk on something new when you can just milk a cash cow, right? But he's right. Creatively, it can lead to some really bland, uninspired stuff.
Yeah, and he's not just talking about any studio. This is HBO we're talking about. They've got this reputation for quality, groundbreaking shows. So for him to see the Penguin falling into these same traps is, well, it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I feel that. So, for someone who doesn't spend all their time getting lost in all things Batman, can you give me a quick rundown of this show and why this critic is so fired up?
Yeah, so the Penguin picks up after the Batman. It's kind of like a look into Oswald Cobblepot's rise to power, how he goes from this kind of pathetic gangster wannabe to the ruthless kingpin we all, well, know. And everyone's been raving about Colin Farrell. Apparently, he's just phenomenal as Penguin.
Yeah, I've heard good things. But so is that what the critic likes about it? The acting?
He does love the acting, but he seems to have a problem with how the show is actually, well, showing us all this. Like, he thinks it's way too obvious. It's constantly explaining itself instead of just letting things unfold naturally.
Ah, I see. He's not a fan of being spoon-fed the story. He wants a bit more mystery, a bit more to chew on, right?
Exactly. And he even uses the word tonto at one point, which, I mean, it's not exactly a compliment.
Oof. Yeah, that's pretty rough. So he thinks the show thinks the audience is, let's just say, not too bright.
Basically, yeah. He thinks it underestimates its viewers, and that's what really gets under his skin.
Yeah.
Like, we're all savvy consumers of media these days. We can pick up on subtle cues, foreshadowing, all that good stuff. We don't need everything spelled out for us.
I'm with him. There's nothing more satisfying than putting the pieces together yourself, right? Those aha moments when you realize what's really going on. Those are what make a story truly memorable.
Right. And he's worried that the penguin is robbing its audience of those moments by over-explaining every little detail. He specifically calls out the flashbacks. Apparently, there are a lot of them,
Huh.
and he finds them incredibly repetitive and unnecessary.
Yeah, flashbacks can be tricky. Sometimes they can be really effective for filling in backstory or revealing a character's motivations, but other times they just feel like lazy storytelling. Like
Yeah.
the writers ran out of ideas and resorted to, well, let's just show them what happened again.
Yeah. And he argues that it's a classic example of telling instead of showing. Like, we get it, Penguin had a rough childhood in Gotham. That's kind of a given, right? But do we need to see it replayed every other scene? A more skilled approach might have just hinted at Penguin's past and then, let the audience piece things together gradually through subtle clues and character interactions.
Totally. It's like the difference between someone handing you a completed puzzle versus giving you all the pieces and letting you figure out how they fit together. The latter is so much more rewarding.
Right. And I think that's what this whole conversation about over-explaining boils down to, that sense of reward. When a show trusts its audience, It creates a more immersive and engaging experience. It invites us to be active participants rather than passive viewers.
100%. And that's what makes for truly great television. When a show respects your intelligence enough to let you draw your own conclusions, to figure things out at your own pace, that's when you know you're in good hands.
So how does this all play out for the Penguin? Well, despite his reservations, our reviewer does acknowledge the show's strengths. He's impressed with the production design, praising its gritty realism, and he's blown away by the performances, particularly Colin Farrell and Kristen Milioti as Sophia Falcone.
Oh, Kristen Milioti is in it. I love her. She was incredible in Fargo and Made for Love. What does he think about her performance?
He calls her electric and says that she practically breathes fire in her scenes. He seems genuinely excited to see where her character goes. But it's almost like he's frustrated because the show has all the right ingredients. Great actors, a compelling setting, a morally complex protagonist, but it's not quite coming together the way he'd hoped.
Oh, I see. So it sounds like a bit of a mixed bag then.
Yeah, and that brings us to a fascinating comparison he makes. He draws a parallel between the Penguin and Gotham.
Gotham. Wait, the other Batman prequel series? What does he say about that?
Well, Gotham definitely had its own issues, but our reviewer seems to admire its breakneck pace, something he feels the Penguin lacks. Yeah, he feels like the Penguin is stuck in first gear, while Gotham was more of a wild, unpredictable ride, even if it occasionally careened off the rails. And this ties into a larger point he makes about how we consume media today. He talks about how, we're just used to getting our entertainment in these quick, easily digestible chunks now.
Oh, totally. Like, think about how often you scroll through social media or just, like, jump between YouTube videos. It's constant, right?
All the time. And I think, consciously or not, it does something to our brains, to our attention spans.
For sure. And that's where, this whole idea of over-explaining in shows like
Mhm.
The Penguin, it gets really interesting. Because are they just, like, mirroring the way we consume information now,
Yeah.
Assuming that we need everything spelled out for us quickly? Or, like, are they actually missing an opportunity to kind of draw viewers in more deeply by trusting them to keep up, to figure things out?
That's such a good point. And it's tricky, right? Because you don't want to alienate your audience by being too vague or confusing, but you also don't want to insult their intelligence by explaining every little detail.
Right. It's a fine line. And I think it becomes even trickier when you've got a character like the Penguin who, like, occupies this really morally ambiguous space in the Batman universe.
Totally. And it seems like our reviewer is really drawn to that complexity. He's fascinated by both Penguin and Sophia Falcone.
Yeah, he seemed pretty blown away by Sofia Falcone. It sounds like the actress is really killing it in that role.
Oh, she is. He uses the word siniestro to describe her, which, like, in Spanish, it has this great double meaning, sinister, obviously, but also left-handed.
Oh, wow. Like she's operating in the shadows, pulling strings in a way that nobody else even sees.
Exactly. And he seems to suggest that, at least in these early episodes, she's the one really calling the shots.
Hmm.
Like, even Penguin doesn't quite grasp the extent of her influence yet.
Ooh, that's juicy. I love that power dynamic, especially in a show like this. But I guess the question is, does it actually go anywhere? Like, does the show deliver on that potential?
So that's where I think his critique really comes into focus. Because after 5 episodes, he just doesn't feel like the show has capitalized on that potential.
Oh, I see. So it's like all setup, not enough payoff.
Exactly. He feels like it's stalling the plot, the character development, like it's all just kind of stuck in this holding pattern.
I can see that being frustrating, especially when you've got a show with so much potential. It's like, come on, writers, give us the good stuff.
Right. And, it makes you wonder if this whole prequel spin-off thing is inherently limiting. Like, can you really explore the depths of a character's transformation when we already know where they're going to end up?
It's a good question. Like, is there even any real suspense if we already know the ending? I guess it depends on how you approach it.
Right. And I think a lot of it comes down to whether or not the journey feels surprising and engaging, even if we know the destination.
Hmm.
And that brings us to what I think is the most bizarre part of his entire review.
Okay, hit me with it. What's so bizarre?
So he's talking about how he's struggling to make sense of the show's pacing, and then, out of nowhere, he mentions that one of the producers cited The Long Good Friday as inspiration.
Wait a minute, The Long Good Friday. Like, the classic British gangster film from the 80s, what does that have to do with the Penguin?
Right. And it's not like he just mentions it in passing. He clearly spends some time wrestling with this,
Yeah.
trying to figure out the connection.
Okay, so he's just as confused as we are.
Totally. Like, what does a gritty London gangster have to do with Gotham City and a penguin-themed villain?
Oh,
I even went back and
yeah.
rewatched a couple of scenes.
Any revelations? Did you crack the code?
Nope. I got nothing.
Okay, so we've got mystery on top of mystery. What does he think it means?
He calls it un misterio, a mystery. And honestly, that's what I love about this whole review. He's not afraid to admit that he doesn't have all the answers.
I like that. It's kind of refreshing, honestly.
Right. I feel like so much online criticism these days is all about, having the definitive take, the hottest burn, the wittiest one-liner. But this guy, he's just genuinely trying to make sense of this show.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It makes his perspective so much more interesting, more relatable.
Totally. And so, yeah, he's left with this long Good Friday thing just hanging out there. Could it be a hint about something that will happen later? Or maybe the producer was just trying to sound cool in interviews. Who knows?
Honestly, at this point, your guess is as good as mine, but hey, it's fun to speculate, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's what makes all this so much fun, right? It's like we're all detectives here, trying to piece together the clues and figure out what it all means.
And sometimes the mystery is more enjoyable than the solution.
100%. Okay, so where does that leave us with the Penguin? We've got a show that, at least according to our Spanish friend, looks incredible, features some really powerful acting, but kind of stumbles when it comes to keeping things moving and trusting its audience.
Don't forget the weird long Good Friday thing. Like, is that a sign that the show will take a turn into something, more interesting, or are we just getting played?
I mean, I hope it's the former. It would be amazing if the Penguin, even within the confines of a prequel, could find a way to surprise us.
Right. Like, imagine if they took some cues from that film, you know? A slow burn exploration of Gotham's underbelly, but with some genuinely unexpected twists and turns.
That's what I'm hoping for. But even if it doesn't quite reach those heights, this whole conversation has been so enlightening. I feel like we've really dug deep into not just the show itself, but also into some of the bigger questions about how we consume stories these days.
Yeah, for sure. Like, that whole thing about over explaining, it really got me thinking. I think we're so used to having information at our fingertips constantly that we've maybe, like, lost sight of the power of a little mystery.
It's true. I mean, think about some of your favorite books or movies, the ones that really stayed with you. Weren't they the ones that left you with a few unanswered questions? The ones that made you think, made you work for it a little bit?
Absolutely. And those are the stories that stick with us the longest because they've given us space to really connect with them on a personal level.
Exactly. It's like when a story trusts you to fill in the blanks, to come to your own conclusions, it becomes so much more powerful, more meaningful. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to turn the question back to you, our listeners. What's your take on all this? How much do you really want to be spoon-fed by the things you watch?
Yeah, what are you hoping for from the rest of the season of The Penguin? Hit us up on social media and let us know.
And until next time, happy viewing, everyone, and may your deep dives be always engaging, thought-provoking, and never, ever over-explained.